A daughter-in-law is like an ATM. If you disagree, divorce awaits, my mother-in-law cheerfully said on the phone. She has always found joy in being mean to me, making my life difficult, especially since my father-in-law passed away. I thought maybe she was lonely, so I put up with it, but I had reached my limit. On top of that, my mother-in-law had a huge misunderstanding, something that was a big deal. I took a deep breath and told her the truth. Right after, I heard her scream from the other side of the phone. My name is Angela Merkel, and I'm a 50-year-old housewife juggling part-time work and household chores. My friends say I'm someone who doesn't get upset easily and is mentally strong. I met my husband Peter after I started working. We were the same age and hit it off right away at a mixer a friend invited me to. I wasn't really interested in dating at the time, and the mixer felt more like my friend was using me to meet men for herself. I didn't want to stand out, so I sat quietly in a corner, eating and drinking alone. Then I noticed someone at another table also keeping a low profile. Our eyes met, and we started talking naturally. That person was Peter, the man I would later marry. We both clearly weren't enjoying the mixer, and Peter commented with a wry smile, "It's tough, isn't it?" His smile was so sweet and hard to describe. After the mixer, we exchanged contact information. At first, we were just good friends, but when Peter confessed his feelings, we started dating. At 35, I married Peter, and 4 years later, our son Larry was born. We've been happy ever since. Peter's parents live far away, hours away by train. When we got married, I actually felt relieved by the distance. That's because every time my mother-in-law saw me, she would say hurtful things like, "Did you really marry such an unfeminine woman, Peter? Someone cuter would suit you better." The first time we met, I thought she was just checking me out, but then she suddenly said that. I was so shocked that I froze. It was the first time someone had spoken to me so rudely right after meeting them, and I didn't know how to respond. Since I didn't react, my mother-in-law took it as a chance to criticize me even more. She said, "I expected a nice gift from someone from the city, but what's this plain baked goods? You have no taste." The gift I brought was a popular assortment from a famous store. It looked simple, but it tasted amazing, and I thought Peter's parents would enjoy it. Unfortunately, my intentions didn't come across at all. The first family meeting was filled with my mother-in-law's criticism. During the whole thing, my father-in-law said nothing, pretending everything was fine, and Peter just gave a nervous smile, not stepping in. I told myself, well, we don't live near each other and we won't meet often, and moved forward with the wedding preparations. I didn't exchange contact info with my mother-in-law, and living in the city, I figured I could avoid dealing with her. After I married Peter, we barely interacted with my mother-in-law, and we lived peacefully. Later, I became pregnant with our son, Larry, and gave birth without any issues. After he was born, my mother-in-law made a fuss about wanting to see her grandson, but Peter handled it well. I was so grateful to be married to him. I knew many husbands sided with their mothers and ignored their wives and kids, but Peter wasn't like that. Our peaceful life continued after Larry was born. He's grown a lot and is now 16, in his 3rd year of middle school. Larry is thinking seriously about his future and aiming for one of the best high schools in the city. He's going through a rebellious phase now, and when I gently point something out, he just says, "Ugh, so annoying." But I can tell he struggles with showing his true feelings, because after acting out, he sometimes apologizes in a very quiet voice. Understanding his struggle, I try not to overreact and just quietly support him through this phase. My main concern these days is his cute, rebellious behavior. Other than that, life is pretty smooth. Work is going well, and I'm actually earning more than Peter now. He's been really busy with his job and often comes home late, but it's not a big issue. We were living peacefully, and then out of nowhere, something happened. It's serious. Dad collapsed. My mother-in-law called with urgent news while we were relaxing as a family of 4 on a weekend. Peter usually spends his days off alone, but this time, we were all together when we got the call. We talked about what to do. "We need to get there quickly," I said. "Yes, let's get ready. Larry, pack for 5 days." "Got it," Larry replied. In this situation, he followed my instructions without question. We quickly packed and left the house, rushing to catch the train. Unfortunately, on the way to the hospital, as directed by my mother-in-law, we got the sad news that my father-in-law had already passed away.
Dad, why? Peter said.
I wasn't very close to my father-in-law and had barely spoken to him, but seeing Peter's sadness made me feel sad too. My mother-in-law was crying loudly, and for once, she didn't say anything harsh to me. After the busy funeral, we returned home a few days later. As I was preparing dinner, Peter made a surprising suggestion. "I want Mom to live with us," he said seriously. "What did you say?" I asked, shocked. "Mom has been really down since Dad passed away, and I'm worried about her," Peter explained. "She's getting older, and we can't leave her alone." I understood his concern, but I couldn't help feeling anxious. My mother-in-law had always been rude to me, and the thought of living with her made me worry about how it might change our peaceful life. Peter didn't like that I didn't agree right away. He looked a bit angry and said, "This is my house, and I decide who lives here." I was surprised by how strong he felt. Peter is usually gentle and often goes along with my decisions, not because I push him, but because he struggles to make decisions on his own. Over time, we developed this natural balance between us. After snapping at me, Peter angrily went to his room. I realized that if Peter had made up his mind, I should support him. I had no intention of being unkind to someone who was feeling lonely. I thought we should try to make my mother-in-law feel welcome since she must be struggling with grief. But when she arrived at the house, her attitude surprised me. "Oh, take my luggage to my room," she said right away. "And for tonight's dinner, let's have steak to celebrate me moving in. Make sure to get a nice steak, okay?" she ordered. She didn't stop there. "Larry, don't just sit there. Bring Grandma's luggage. You're the youngest, so you need to work hard for me." Even though she doted on Larry, my mother-in-law thought she was the most important person in the family and naturally started bossing everyone around. Larry, with a troubled look, did what his grandmother asked because he knew arguing would only make things worse. "Come on, move. Stop zoning out," she ordered, and we all had to hurry under her commands. After my father-in-law passed away, instead of feeling lonely, my mother-in-law started living more freely in our house. It would have been one thing if we just had to deal with her demands, but after she moved in, she began picking on me harshly. "What is this? This side dish is too salty. Are you trying to send me to the hospital with high blood pressure?" Complaining about my cooking became an everyday thing. She would complain at every meal, even though I used normal seasonings and Peter and Larry preferred food with lighter flavors. It was clear she was just trying to irritate me. On top of that, she constantly criticized my laundry, cleaning, and all the household chores. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I handed her the vacuum cleaner and said, "If you think I'm doing it wrong, please show me how it's done." She took the vacuum and cleaned, but her skills were pretty average, nothing different from mine. Still, she confidently declared, "This is how cleaning should be done." I couldn't understand how she was so sure of herself. One day, I finished work early and came home. When I arrived, my mother-in-law was chatting with a woman I didn't know. "This is Anna Smith, a good friend I've made since moving here. We get along very well," she said. Mrs. Smith greeted me briefly and then continued talking with my mother-in-law. "A daughter-in-law needs proper training. Emma is too soft," my mother-in-law said. "No, I don't think that's true," Mrs. Smith replied. It seemed Mrs. Smith was a good listener for my mother-in-law. I pretended not to hear them and went to the kitchen to start dinner. Every now and then, they glanced at me with unpleasant smiles. The atmosphere was tense. Suddenly, there was a loud noise. "Oh, sorry about that," said Mrs. Smith as her coffee cup fell to the floor. Thankfully, it didn't break, but the coffee spilled everywhere. As I started wiping up the coffee, something fell on my head. "What are you doing?" I exclaimed. "Oops, my hand slipped," my mother-in-law said. What had landed on me was her coffee, and both women burst out laughing as if nothing serious had happened. "I'm home. What's going on?" "It's a bit noisy," Larry said as he came home from school. He took one look and quickly understood what was happening. "What are you two doing?" he shouted angrily at my mother-in-law and Mrs. Smith. He pulled a towel from his bag and gently wiped my head. Even though Larry usually acts rebellious and distant, the way he helped me showed how kind he really is. After wiping up the mess, Larry gave a sharp glare at both of them. "What are you doing to my mom?" he demanded. "Larry, dear, you're misunderstanding. It was just an accident," my mother-in-law replied. "Shut up. Do you think I don't know what you usually do to her? Instead of bullying her, why don't you spend your time doing something useful?" Larry's firm words left them both speechless. "Who do you think you are?" Larry continued. "Anyone who treats my mom like that isn't a guest. Get out now." Under Larry's strong presence, Mrs. Smith quickly left the house, and my mother-in-law, unable to argue, retreated to her room, clearly upset. "Thank you, Larry," I said. "It's not just for you, Mom. I just wanted to get rid of the troublemakers so I can study in peace," he replied shyly. Watching him, I felt truly lucky to have him. But the trouble didn't end there. When Peter came home, it seemed my mother-in-law had already told him her version of the story. "Why did you treat Grandma and her friend like that?" Peter shouted at Larry. Larry's face fell, and my mother-in-law watched with a smug smile. "Peter, you've got it wrong. Larry was just trying to protect me," I tried to explain. "Protect you?" "Mom says Larry barged into the living room, made a scene, and kicked them out. I thought it was a joke." My mother-in-law had twisted the facts to make herself look innocent, and Peter believed her. I tried hard to explain what really happened, but Peter wouldn't listen. "First of all, you and Larry are too cold to my mom. She's my mother, and you need to respect her more." Peter lectured us without giving us a chance to speak. I understood that Peter wanted to care for his mother, but it was hard to make him see the truth. He wasn't taking our side seriously and believed whatever his mother told him, especially since we had been living apart from her for so long. I hadn't realized how much of a mama's boy Peter was, but it became clear over time. Things had really turned into a mess. I found myself sighing more than ever these days. After the incident with Larry, my mother-in-law got even more confident, twisting the facts and reporting them to Peter whenever we disagreed with her. This made everything difficult, and even 4 months later, Larry and I were avoiding contact with her, just trying to live peacefully. One day, while I was sorting through receipts in my wallet, I noticed one of my credit cards, a black card, was missing. Did I lose it somewhere? I wondered. As I was thinking about it, my phone rang. It was my mother-in-law. I sighed, showing my true feelings, tempted to ignore it. But knowing it might cause more problems later, I reluctantly answered. "Hello," I said.
"Hi, Angela."
"Guess where I am?" she asked in a playful tone. "I don't know," I replied, not very interested. She wasn't discouraged by my lack of interest and cheerfully continued, "I'm at a travel agency. I'm planning a trip to Paris with 22 of my relatives." "That sounds fun," I said vaguely, not really caring. Then she dropped a huge surprise. "Oh, by the way, you're paying for this trip. I borrowed your black card from your wallet and memorized the PIN, so I'll be using it." "What?" I was shocked. She laughed loudly and said, "A daughter-in-law is just like an ATM. If she objects, divorce is waiting." I could hear her relatives laughing in the background, making comments like, "Go easy on her," and "You're going to make her cry." But at that moment, I wasn't upset by her words anymore. I had bigger things to deal with. "By the way, I've already canceled that card. And Peter and I have been divorced for 3 months." Silence followed. "What?" my mother-in-law finally said, clearly confused. She didn't understand what was happening at all. I realized I'd need to explain everything, but it was clear she had no clue about the situation. I decided it was time to explain everything from the start, knowing the conversation ahead wouldn't be easy. There had been warning signs even before my mother-in-law moved in with us. One sign was Peter coming home later and going out more on holidays. He wasn't doing well at his job, and his income had stayed the same for years, which made our financial situation harder. That's why I started working more to support our household. Peter didn't seem worried about his low salary at all. He thought we were doing fine and didn't need to work harder, but the truth was we were only managing because of my efforts. Even though Peter wasn't making much money, he was family-oriented and helped around the house, so I wasn't too unhappy with our life. But as time went on, Peter came home late more often. He said it was because of unpaid overtime, claiming it was good to owe people favors, which might help him get a raise or promotion. This was strange, because Peter had never cared about his career before. As he worked more overtime, he also started going out alone on holidays. One day, I suggested we do something as a family. Lately, you've been going out alone a lot. How about we go somewhere together next week? I asked. But he quickly said no. Actually, I bumped into an old classmate recently. We've made plans to meet next week. Don't worry, it's a guy, he added, even though I hadn't asked. His explanation fell off, and I sensed something was wrong. I decided to quietly look into Peter's activities, and I soon found proof of his infidelity. The meeting he mentioned was with a classmate, but it wasn't a man, it was a woman. I couldn't believe how much evidence I found. Maybe I had been too busy working to notice what was happening. When I realized Peter was cheating, I didn't feel shocked. I had loved him and thought marrying him was the right decision, but the moment I learned he had betrayed Larry and me, all my feelings for him disappeared. Right after his affair came to light, Peter had his mother move in, as if he was trying to force a new living arrangement on us. My affection for him completely turned into negative feelings. Had he shown true remorse, things might have been different. I was ready to forgive him. I gathered all the evidence I had and waited for a moment when we could talk alone. You've been having an affair, haven't you?
I said.
Peter was shocked when he saw the pile of proof in front of him. He tried to argue, saying, "It's not my fault. You were always busy with work and ignored me. You're to blame for the affair, too." Instead of apologizing, Peter blamed me, trying to justify his actions. "I didn't want to have an affair, but you didn't show me enough affection. You took me for granted, and that's why it happened," he said, slamming his hand on the desk, as if acting tough would make me back down. His excuses were hard to accept. "Is that all you have to say?" I asked, calmly sliding the already filled-out divorce papers toward him. His face turned pale. "What? This is a joke, right?" he asked. "No, this is not a joke. Divorce is not too extreme. It's what happens when someone cheats," I said coldly. Peter desperately tried to explain himself, but I just gave him a cold stare. "You call it just an affair, but do you really think betraying me and Larry can be dismissed so easily? You don't seem to understand how serious this is. Cheating on your family is a real reason for divorce, as the law says." Hearing the word law, Peter went silent. I kept going. "You said you cheated because I was busy working, but the truth is, I had to work because you couldn't earn enough. Blaming me for your own failure is shameless." Peter's eyes filled with tears as I continued. He wasn't strong-willed, and trying to win an argument without admitting his mistakes wasn't working. "I don't want a divorce. I can't handle it," he sobbed. But tears don't fix things, especially for adults. If he didn't want a divorce, he shouldn't have cheated. "If you say you don't want a divorce, I'll get a lawyer and start the process right away. I'll do whatever it takes to end this marriage." My decision to divorce Peter wasn't just because of his affair, it was also because I needed to get away from his mother. I knew I couldn't live with her anymore. I was determined to go through with the divorce and stayed firm on my decision. Eventually, Peter agreed and signed the divorce papers. Seeing his signature, I sighed in relief. "Please wait before telling Mom. I'll tell her myself. She might be shocked and upset," Peter said. I was surprised by his request, but I agreed.
"All right.
In the meantime, I'll start preparing to move out. I'll also have custody of Larry. With your income, it would be hard for you to support both him and your mom," I added. Peter nodded quietly. We filed the divorce papers quickly, but we would deal with dividing assets and child support later. I explained to my mother-in-law, "Peter hasn't told you yet, but I've been living here just to get ready to move out. I've found a new place, and I'll be moving next week." On the other end of the phone, my mother-in-law stayed silent, likely shocked by what I had said. "If you have nothing to say, I'm going to hang up," I told her. At this, she finally reacted, exclaiming, "How could you do this? Why would you divorce without my consent?" I calmly responded, "There's no need for family consent to get a divorce. That's not a rule." She groaned in frustration. Then, I heard a woman's voice, probably from the travel agency, saying, "I'm sorry, but this credit card cannot be used." The charge is $350,000. How would you like to proceed? I couldn't believe it. My mother-in-law had tried to charge $350,000 to my black card without my permission. Even though I was the breadwinner and owned a black card, I never thought she would attempt such a large transaction without asking. As I stood there in shock, my mother-in-law asked, panicking, "Why did you cancel the black card?"
Why? Because you snooped on my PIN, I said.
You thought I didn't notice, but I saw you peek at it without permission. There had been a moment when we dined out with my mother-in-law and some others. I didn't have cash, so I used my black card. When I pulled it from my wallet, I noticed her eyes light up, and she kept watching the card closely. I realized then that she had an obsession with money, but I never imagined she would try to use my black card or sneak behind me to steal my PIN. I could even hear her heavy breathing as she tried to be sneaky. After that incident, I immediately canceled the card. I didn't use that card much and had other credit cards, so canceling it didn't cause me any problems. You'll have to pay for the trip yourself, I told my mother-in-law. She was speechless, clearly not expecting me to catch her snooping. She probably thought she could take a free trip and keep mistreating me, but I wasn't going to fall for such a simple trick. I could hear her relatives in the background. Emma, what do you mean you can't pay? What's going to happen with the Paris trips? They sounded frustrated, and my mother-in-law was scrambling to make excuses. I felt this conversation was pointless, so I sighed and said, "I'm hanging up now." She tried to say something, but I ended the call without hesitation. Shaking my head in disbelief, I organized my wallet and started packing for the move. I didn't have many personal things, so I knew it wouldn't take long. Once I finished packing my stuff, I planned to help Larry. But suddenly, the front door slammed open, and I heard frantic footsteps rushing toward my room.
What do you mean by this?
"You've made me look like a fool," my mother-in-law yelled. "Welcome back. How was your trip?" I said calmly. "The payment is on hold. You need to come with me to the store right now and pay the $35,000. As she ranted, I looked at her angrily. She had never seen me react this way, and it clearly shook her. "Why should I pay for your trip?" I said. "Peter and I are divorced. Legally, we're strangers now. You need to understand that." "How can you talk to your mother-in-law like that?" she snapped. "That's because you're not my mother-in-law anymore. Can't you see that? Are you stupid?" My words hit her hard, and her face quickly went pale. Before, I had been more patient because she was Peter's mother, but I decided I didn't need to hold back anymore. She glared at me and angrily said, "Do whatever you want. It'll be a relief if you're gone. Just leave behind Larry. He's supposed to inherit the house." I couldn't believe what she said, but before I could respond, Larry, who had just come home, walked in and changed the mood. "Stop joking like that," he said. "I'm leaving with Mom. Living here with Dad and you, Grandma, would be torture." "No amount of money could make me stay," Larry said. "Larry, what are you talking about? Have you been brainwashed by this fool?" My mother-in-law snapped at me, but Larry and I were shocked by her words. Larry responded, "The fool is you, Grandma. And what do you want me to inherit? There's nothing here worth inheriting, just an old house on useless land." He was right. The house wasn't valuable. It was an old building on unattractive land, and its value had gone down over the years. After that, my mother-in-law collapsed, exhausted, and we could only watch. I kept packing for the move and started working on the property division with Peter. Even though I couldn't expect much from his income, it was important to hold him accountable for his actions. I also demanded an apology from Peter's affair partner, and both of them were held responsible. While the property division might not have been a lot for Peter, it was a big blow to him. He ended up using all his savings and even selling personal belongings to get by. As they struggled financially, my mother-in-law, who couldn't control her spending, didn't look for a job. Eventually, Peter had to sell the house and land, which were worth very little. The small amount from the sale was all they had left to live on. They moved into a rundown apartment and faced more struggles every day. Finally, my mother-in-law found a job, but her difficult attitude made it hard for her to keep any job for long.